Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate 3 different processes for creating the Make One increase. And then we'll compare the results against each other, as well as look at how the effect of different types of knitting needles and a change of knitting style might affect your results. So let's get started. This first version is the one that is most often found in knitting patterns and is sometimes called the raised increase. So I'm going to work across in a new color, and this will help you see what's going on in the results of this. I'm going to work 2 stitches, do a make one increase, work 2 more stitches, and then do another make one increase. There are left and right versions of this. So over here, I'm going to do a left leaning make one, and over here, I'm going to do a right leaning make one increase. So now I want to do, as I said, I want one that leans to the left. I'm going to drop the yarn right now so that you can see what I'm doing. I have a blue stitch on the left needle and a blue stitch under the right needle because the light green stitches are the new live stitches that are being created. So this blue stitch and that blue stitch are from the same row of knitting. And in between those 2 stitches, you can see this horizontal strand. It's the running thread that connects one stitch to another. So I'm going to use my needle tip over here to lift that running thread. So if I'm lifting it from the front, you can see that the way that it's sitting on the needle is that it is angled to the left. And that's good because we want a left leaning make one increase. The other thing that you'll see is that the leading leg of the stitch, that's the leg that is closest to the tip, is the one that's connected to the right. And the trailing leg, the one that is furthest from the tip, is over the back. We want to work this lifted strand so that it twists. And the way that you work stitches so that they twist, whether it's a lifted strand like this or just a stitch on the needle, is to work it through the trailing leg. So we have to knit it through that leg that's hanging over the back. So we take our working needle and we work it through there, and what you'll see is that the working needle is pointing to the left, which is good because we want a left leaning increase. So now we're going to wrap the yarn around this needle tip. If you are a continental knitter, you're going to just grab the yarn. If you're an English style knitter, you are going to wrap it around this way. Whichever way you get the yarn around the needle in order to knit it is what you need to do, and then pull that new strand through. And what you'll see is that you have a twisted loop under the needle and it twists to the left. So everything we did along the way there ensured that it was going to be left. We lifted it up onto the needle and it was angled to the left. We worked through the trailing leg and our working needle was pointed to the left. When the stitch came off the needle, it was pointed to the left. So now we want a right leaning make one increase. And so we're going to lift this again. This time we lift it from the back. You don't really have to remember if you have to lift from the front or back. What you do is you look at how that stitch is sitting on the needle. This time it is leaning to the right. It is angled to the right. And this time the leading leg is hanging over the back and the trailing leg is hanging over the front. In order to work this so that it twists, we have to work through the trailing leg, which means we have to work through the front leg. We take our working needle and in order to work it through that front leg, we have to insert it this way, and now our working needle is pointed to the right. Again, that's telling us this is going to end up twisting to the right. And we bring the yarn around the needle, pull it through, and when this one comes off the needle, it's twisting to the right. So that's our make one right. So now we can look at the results. We have our original columns of knit stitches right here, and this is where we raised that running thread right here. So the base of this new column of stitches is this blue one right here. That's the one that's twisted. And then the new stitches that we created with the different color yarn were the ones that were on the needle, but those create the first actual row of knitting in the new column. This is the base, and this is the first stitch. And if we look over on the other side, we can see that here's the left leaning one right here. We see that little strand going to the left, and there's the first actual untwisted stitch. So I've worked a couple more rows of the light green, and now I've switched to dark green, and I'm going to do method 2. Again, I'm going to work 2 stitches, and then I'm going to work my increase. This time, rather than raising that running thread, I'm just going to do a yarn over. Now, if you hold the yarn in your left hand, you'll see that when you do a yarn over, that strand leans to the left. That's what we want, is we want the strand to lean to the left to do a make one increase. If you hold the yarn in your right hand, then you want to bring the yarn to the front and then back over in order to create your yarn over. Either way will work to create a make one left increase. Going to work our 4 stitches. And now we are going to do a reverse yarn over. So if you're a continental knitter holding the yarn in your left hand, you're going to bring your needle in front and swing it around. And so now you'll see that the yarn is leaning to the right. So that's what we want for a make one right. You want to make sure that you're not pulling too tight. You don't want this other stitch to come over. You want to make sure that you leave some slack. Maybe put your finger on it and then knit the other stitches. If you are an English style knitter and you're holding the yarn in your right hand, instead of bringing the yarn under the needle and then over, you're going to bring the yarn over the needle to the front and then back around to the left. And you can see that it's leaning to the right. You can see that the working yarn, when I'm holding it over in this direction, causes the strand to have that right lean as well. Now, when you're working the next row and you get to that yarn over, you want to make sure that you work it so that it twists. So again, we're looking at that where the leading leg is versus the trailing leg. And we can see that that trailing leg is over the front of the needle. And in order to make this twist, we have to work it through the trailing leg. So if you're working flat, you're going to be purling it through this. If you are knitting in the round, you're going to be knitting through this. But to purl it, we come through here and then pull it through. When we get to the next one, again, we are looking for where the leading leg and trailing leg is. We can see it's leaning to the left, and that trailing leg is over the back. So we have to turn the work so that we can kind of see where that trailing leg is in order to purl through it. And again, if you are working in the round, you're going to be knitting these stitches through the trailing leg rather than purling them. So remember last time when we were using a new color, the twisted loop that we had in the fabric was in the old color and the new stitch was in the new color. This time, the first row of the new color is where you see that twisted loop. So this make one increase ends up in the fabric a row later than the one where you raise it up. So if you are working across a right side row and you're doing a make one increase, if you use this version, the twisted loop is going to share the same row with the old stitches, the ones that were on the left-hand needle. If you do a yarn over version, then that twisted loop is going to share a row with the new stitches that are appearing on the right-hand needle. So it's just a 1 row offset. This version of the Make One Increase has a couple of names. Elizabeth Zimmerman or EZ's Make One Increases. You could call it a half-hitch cast-on. You could call it a backwards loop cast-on. It's got a variety of names. And again, we can create one that twists to the right or the left. In this situation, what we're going to do is create the twisted loop on the needle. So rather than putting just a regular yarn over on the needle, we're going to create a twisted loop that goes on the needle. So to get one that goes to the left, if you are a continental knitter and you've got your yarn over your finger like this, you can see that this is angled to the left. In order to create a twisted loop, we need to work that strand through the trailing leg. This would be the leading leg of this strand, and this would be the trailing leg. So we turn our finger like this, and then we can grab that loop, and you can see that as it's coming off the finger and onto the needle, it is twisting to the left. So that's your make one left. If you are an English style knitter, your yarn is being held to the right rather than to the left. So if you see the yarn hanging over your finger like this, you can see that the leading leg of this strand is over the front, and the trailing leg is over the back, and that this is angled to the right. We want one that angles to the left. So we swing our finger around the other way, and now we can see that it's going to the left. And we want our needle to go through the trailing leg here. So we have to move our finger forward like this to get it through the loop there. And then when you look at it, you can see that it's going to the left. So for this one, we want the make one right, and our continental knitters, we've got the yarn so that it's on the left. We want to swing this around so that it's hanging over our finger to the right, and we want to enter through the trailing leg, which is over the front of our finger. So as it comes off our finger and onto the needle, we can see that it is twisting to the right. If you are an English style knitter and you've got your yarn tension like this, you can see that it is already angled to the right, and the trailing leg is hanging over the back of your finger. So you're going to twist your finger around this way to get through that back needle, or through the back of that strand. And then when you look at it on the needle, you can see that it is angling to the right. All right, so when we come to our twisted loop, it's already twisted under the needle, and we want it to stay that way. So when we want a stitch to remain the way it is, whether it's twisted or untwisted, we work it through the leading leg. So in this case, that leading leg is hanging over the back. It's the one that's closest to the tip. So I'm going to insert my needle this way. Now I'm purling, but if you were knitting, you would go through that back leg that way. So it's through that leading leg for this make one right. Now we've come to this other one, and we have to look at where that leading leg is. And in this case, it's hanging over the front. This one might be a little harder to see, but if you kind of look at it, you can see that the leading leg is over the front. So this one is going to be worked through the front leg. And you can confirm that as it comes off the needle. You still see your twisted to the left. So just like with the yarn over make one increase, that twisted loop is in this light green row, not in the dark green below. And that's because you didn't lift the running thread that was already existing. You created the twisted loop in the new running thread that was being created between the two new stitches on either side of it. I want to compare these different increases, but I'm going to compare them in a couple of ways. These three swatches were all done using version 1, which is that raised make one increase where you lift an existing running thread. But there are some differences in what was going on. With this blue one, I was using my English style of knitting, which requires long straight needles and anchoring a needle against my body. But it's the method that I use for knitting English. That's not the way everybody who knits English knits, but that's what the needles were that I used for this one. For this one, I use same needle size, same needle brand, everything is the same. The tips are exactly the same. These are very long pointy tips. These are Signature Needle Arts needles. They've been discontinued, but this is a very long pointy tip. And I use my continental knitting style for this swatch. And then for this one, I use my continental knitting swatch again, but this time I use these bamboo double points, which have a fairly reasonable tip in terms of pointiness, but it's not the same as that. So let's take a close-up look at these swatches and see if we can notice any difference. This is the one I did with my straight needles, and you can see that here's where we've got our increases right here. They're very small. Everything looks very even. Part of that is just my knitting style, but because I had very long pointy tips, I could lift that running thread and just keep it here at the very tip, and it doesn't pull any slack out of its neighbors. This is the one where I use these circular needles with this tip, but I use my continental knitting style. I had some tension issues where I had these two make one increases that were very close together. I had one here and one here, and I ended up pulling some slack out of the neighboring stitches, which made them smaller in order to do these. And so part of that is just my technique with my continental knitting style. It's not going to be true for everybody with continental knitting. And as I did the rows up further, the tension was better because I wasn't taking slack out of two neighboring stitches. So this particular row is a little bit smaller, but the increases themselves look, fairly decent. This is the one I did with the bamboo tips. And these look pretty good. You do see a little bit of, sometimes you can get a pinhole at the base of the stitches, and some of that might depend on the yarn that you're using, how smooth it is versus how fluffy it is. So this one is just a little bit more noticeable that I have these very tiny holes. When this is washed and blocked, this is a little bit fluffier. It might fill in, but this is not really considered a hole. This is just space that needs to be there because these two columns of stitches have to be separated in order to make room for this one. And so there's a little bit of a hole there. So now let's compare these three swatches. So this is the one that I just showed you in bamboo where I did the raised increase. This one is, I used the bamboo needles again and I did the yarn over increase. And this one, I used the bamboo needles, but I did the twisted loop decrease or increase. So we've already seen this one. I've got a little bit of a pinhole at the base of each of these. This is the one with the yarn over, and I don't have that pinhole in this one. Everything looks really even. The tension looks really even in all of this. With the yarn over increase, you are creating the extra slack that you need in order to produce this twisted loop. You're not having to borrow any slack from the neighboring stitches. So you don't have to have as pointy of needles or be quite as careful working as close to the tip as possible. And then this is the twisted loop. So again, you're creating the slack you need, but a twisted loop on the needle is going to take more yarn than just a simple yarn over on the needle. So these twisted loops end up being a bit larger. So I do have a little bit of a hole under each of these, and this could be just this swatch. What I tend to notice with the twisted loop versions for me and my knitting is that these twisted loops end up a little bit larger than I personally would like. But again, once it's washed and blocked, it might fill in better, or you might just personally like that. So my preference tends to be the yarn over version because it gives me that little extra slack, but it doesn't give me as much as the twisted loop. And I also just find a yarn over easier to do than the twisted loop. So it really just is personal choice, which one you find most efficient, which one can you remember, which one gives you the results that you like best. And it may not be the same for every project. You may find in some projects the one that you really prefer isn't working for that project. And so it's nice to know that you have other options so that you can vary what you're going to do. Now, does it matter that these make one increases occur in a row later than these do in terms of where they are placed in the fabric? In most cases, it will not matter. Having it be off by one row is not going to make a difference. The exception is going to be if after your last make one increase row, if you're supposed to switch to something else and you haven't kind of completed that make one, it's just a yarn over on the needle. Maybe you have to put slip stitches onto waste yarn, like for a thumb or something. In that case, you might want to just adjust when you're doing those make one increases, or you could do the final one as a raised increase instead, and just to complete it so that you have everything off the needles when it's time to work on the next step. So you can combine these in the same project if you need to. Well, that's it for this week's Technique Tuesday video. If you'd like to learn more about different types of increases and decreases, I have a playlist over here. If you want to learn some tricks for fixing your make one increase mistakes, I have a video for you over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.